Sunday on C-SPAN at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific Time. Next, former Mexican President Carlos Salinas. Last night, the American Enterprise Institute honored him, and in his speech, President Salinas talked for about 30 minutes about the future of world trade. The entire program runs 50 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are not already, please rise for the national anthems of Mexico and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce your host for the evening, Christopher Demuth, President of the American Enterprise Institute.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Jim Pruitt and Dick Thompson and the members of the dinner committee for all of your good work in bringing together such a distinguished group. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to thank Jim Pruitt and Dick Thompson and the members of the dinner committee for bringing together this large and distinguished group for AEI's prom. Welcome all to the annual dinner of the American Enterprise Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Thank you. It is 1 month, exactly 1 month, since America's political Big Bang of November 1994. And Washington is abuzz with speculation over what it all means for national policy and local careers. At AEI, we are confident that our research will have a massive influence with the 104th Congress, and we are polishing up some of our favorite policy ideas. Herb Stein thinks it would be economical to combine the season's two hottest constitutional amendments into one, to provide that public school students may pray for a balanced budget. My own top priority is tax reform. I think it is high time that contributions to policy research institutes be made full-fledged tax credits rather than mere deductions. And to ingratiate ourselves with the new Congress, we are making the following standing offer. Any member of Congress who favors a balanced budget amendment but opposes reforming Social Security, Medicare, and farm subsidy spending may receive a free IQ test from Charles Murray. It is right that we should focus intently on the first moves of the Republicans and Democrats in their unaccustomed new roles. In that theory of the first cosmic Big Bang, and in what is now generally called chaos theory, initial conditions have a profound effect on the structure and propensity of an entire system far into the future. This is also true of founding moments in politics, and 1994 is not a blip, but a new founding moment in American politics. So it is a good sign that the first official act of our new political order was the emphatic approval last week of an ambitious, highly debated agreement for trade liberalization. The new populist energies in American politics have much good work in store, but they have also created substantial protectionist factions in both political parties, the first since World War II. This might have yielded a bellwether rejection of rules-based open trade, emboldening those who dream of traditional hedgerows shielded from the gales of economic and technological progress. Free trade makes America even richer, freer, and more vibrant than it would be otherwise, but our stakes are nothing compared to those of smaller and less developed nations and those recovering from communism. Many of them would be condemned to self-sufficiency and therefore to economic and social stagnation by a closing of international trade. So the GATT vote is more than good economics. It means America, in the midst of our intense preoccupation with domestic social issues and policy reforms, is going to remain internationalist and benevolent, a leader of the global revolution in politics and economics. Carlos Salinas de Gortari understands the real stakes in free trade better than any man on earth. At AEI, we are naturally attracted to political leaders with PhDs from Harvard who fill their ministries with Chicago economists. But this is not the main reason our Council of Academic Advisors chose President Salinas to receive our Francis Boyer Award for 1994. Mexico has undergone its own political Big Bang in recent years, and it was President Salinas who was present at the creation and who boldly established the initial conditions that have set Mexico firmly on its way toward prosperity, democracy, and a stable rule of law. He is that rarest of political figures, the successful revolutionary, and his work is far from done. We are immensely honored that just a few days after handing the sash of the Mexican presidency to Ernesto Zedillo, he has come to Washington to accept our award and lecture here this evening. To present the Boyer Award and introduce President Salinas, I will call upon Paul Orifice, a man who is himself a walking illustration of the strong affinity of strong patriotism and strong internationalism. Paul was born in Italy to a family that was noisily on the wrong side of Mussolini and escaped in the nick of time for Ecuador. He arrived in America a teenager with few resources and no English, but before the days of bilingual education and the welfare trap. He earned a chemical engineering degree from Purdue, and over the next 30 years rose to the top of one of America's greatest business corporations, the Dow Chemical Company, which prospered under his leadership as never before. Paul has received countless honorary degrees and high awards from governments and engineering societies in Latin America, Europe, and the United States, and has been a top advisor on trade policy to several American administrations. He has been an AEI trustee since 1980, and this morning stepped down following his final term as chairman of the AEI board. He has led the Institute during a time of great productivity in our research programs and renewed strength in our finances. He and Dow have been leading financial supporters, and one of our major endowment funds bears his name. It is for research in regulatory and tort reform, and we have wisely been husbanding it for years, just waiting for the Gingrichites to take charge. His constant moral and intellectual support and his great love of America and the freedom and opportunities it provides has been a great spur to achievement for everyone at AEI. Paul is not leaving us bereft of leadership, as he will explain in a moment, but it is with sharp regret that I call upon him tonight for the last time as AEI's chairman. Paul Orphis.
Thank you, Chris. I've had 4 marvelous years as the chairman of this wonderful institution, an institution that I've often called the one with the most brains per capita in America. And I would just like to introduce my successor, the new chairman of AEI, Bill Taylor, the chairman and CEO of Cigna Corporation. Bill, would you stand up so a few people can see you? I've always felt that a job, whether in industry or in an institution like this, is never done unless you do a very good job of selecting your successor. I think I've succeeded in this beyond my wildest dreams. I also would like to welcome some new members of the AEI board. Martin Koffel of URS Corporation, Ken Lay of Enron, Marilyn Lewis of American Water Works, Alex Mandel of AT&T, Jim Shad of Reader's Digest, and John Snow of CSX Corporation. We have a very active board, and they will add much to it. For 17 years, the Francis Boyer Award has been AEI's primary means of recognizing statesmen and intellectuals who have made outstanding contributions to social thought and public policy, many of them with us this evening. The award was established by SmithKline Beecham in memory of Francis Boyer, its distinguished chairman in the 50s and 60s. With us this evening are Henry Wendt, recently retired chairman of SmithKline and a leading AEI trustee for many years, and Jerry Carabellas, president of SmithKline's North American Pharmaceutical Division. I would like to recognize and thank Harry and Jerry at this time. Thank you. The 1994 Boyer Award recipient and lecturer is Carlos Salinas de Gortari, President of the United Mexican States from 1988 through 1994. President Salinas first attracted the world's attention as a scholarly budget minister who became president and launched bold reforms in economic policy, tax reduction, and privatization of state industries. Later, he led the risky and successful drive for negotiation and adoption of a North American Free Trade Agreement. And in his final year in office, he introduced landmark political reforms leading to last summer's national elections, the freest and most vigorous in Mexico's history, the necessary foundation for further steps that his successor, President Ernesto Zedillo, announced last week. These reforms have yielded dramatic reductions in inflation and public debt, huge increases in economic productivity, and strong private sector-driven economic growth exceeding 4% as he left office. The new leaders of the developing nations have all learned to talk about free markets, fiscal and monetary discipline, and limited government. But Carlos Salinas showed that it could be done. He has achieved more at a practical level than anyone else, and left a record others will follow. For this, he has earned a high place in Mexican history and in the history of the global economic revolution of the late 20th century. But I would like to emphasize two further points about President Salinas: his courage and his example to those in the more advanced democracies. The achievements of the Salinas era were built not only on sound economic ideas and skillful political tactics, but on sheer physical bravery. The assassinations this year of two of President Salinas' closest political associates, Luis Donaldo Colosio and Jose Francisco Ruiz Massieu, are brutal evidence of the powerful forces opposing the reforms he put in place. From the beginning of his term, President Salinas knew the stakes better than anyone on the outside and acted time and time again with the cool assurance of a man who knows his destiny and his nation's destiny. In the advanced democracies, we sometimes preach about democracy and the rule of law without remembering that our own political institutions were secured slowly and at immense human cost. But democracy is not a textbook theory. It's built brick by brick, a tradition of specific deeds of practical men. Today, the Washington media is filled with heart-rending stories of congressional staffers who, as a result of our November elections, are actually being forced to seek jobs in the private sector. Such are the casualties of political battle in America today and in Mexico today and tomorrow. The Salinas Revolution reminds us that our own democracy and free economy are an inheritance. Future generations of Mexicans will enjoy their own distinctive inheritance because of Carlos Salinas' deeds in more perilous times. I have spoken of President Salinas' past, but as Christy Mew said earlier, his work is not finished yet. The initial results of the NAFTA Accord have already proven its opponents wrong, both north and south of the Rio Grande. With any luck, NAFTA will turn out to be only a prelude to greater achievements to come in trade liberalization and a new world order of peaceful economic competition. For all these reasons, we at AEI are greatly honored to present to Carlos Salinas de Gortari our Boyer Award for 1994. The inscription of the award reads, "To a bold and brave leader for modern democracy, private enterprise, and free trade, an inspiration to Americans north and south." Or more properly, a un estadista valiente y atrevido en pro de la democracia moderna, la libre empresa y el libre comercio, y una inspiración a todos los americanos, norte y sur. Señor Presidente,
thank you very much. Please sit down. Thank you. Okay. Please sit down. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this honor. I appreciate Mr. DeMuth's comments and certainly Paul's remarks. I have to tell you that for me it's a great satisfaction to receive the American Enterprise Institute's Boyer Award, and my sincere gratitude for this significant honor, which also provides me with the opportunity to elaborate with you some thoughts on the world's most important trends and the new economic and political conditions at the end of this 20th century and the beginning of the new one, and share with you as well the efforts of my country during the past 6 years to be ready and prepared for the challenges of the new century to come. we all have to be prepared for these challenges. We all have to continue learning. I have learned some things as a former president. I've been former president for 7 days. 7, yes. And what I have learned is that when you are president, you have dinner first, and then you deliver your speech. When you are former president, you deliver your speech first, and then they decide if they give you dinner. Well, I have learned more things than this one, but what I wanted to share with you is certainly that these are crucial times. These are crucial times because change has cast aside paradigms, ideological frames, and it has redefined political circumstances, and it has modified economic conditions. The end of the Cold War opened expectations like we hadn't seen since the end of the Second World War, but the outcome is much different to the expectations that it presented. Signs that are of opposing trends are present among us. Local needs and traditional interests on the one side, and on the other hand, the tremendous flow of fair trade, investment, technology, information, increasingly global in their scope. That is why during the past 6 years in Mexico, we learned that these future equilibriums needed solutions that require economic, social, and political reform. And one of the best examples, no doubt, is trade, the main engine of the world economy. Today, if you want growth, if you want development, if you want additional employment, you need competitiveness, productivity, and certainly open markets. And that is why we in Mexico, one of the most overprotected countries in the world, had to change so rapidly in order to be part of this world transformation and take advantage of the opportunities that new and open markets were bringing to the rest of the world. We had to break that vicious circle of public deficit, high inflation, and the absence of economic growth. Yes, we learned the lesson that populism is not needed for social reform and is not equivalent to social programs. And in a country like Mexico, which you were popular for the number of enterprises that you nationalized, we had to reverse the way of thinking. And privatization became a fundamental tool to reverse the problems of stagnation, high indebtedness that we were facing. Yes, there's a Mexican saying that goes something like this in English: the goods must be used to solve the problems. Los bienes son para resolver los males. The public goods must be used to solve the social needs. So we decided to privatize public enterprises in order to face the problem of excessive indebtedness. And yes, we used the resources, almost $40 billion that came from cash privatizations, to reduce domestic debt in Mexico. And domestic debt that in the US represents about 60% of your gross domestic product, or in European countries, 100% of gross domestic product. In Mexico today, it's only 10% of GDP. And with this drastic reduction in domestic debt, thanks to privatization, we were able to reduce the servicing of such a debt and also to reduce taxes. And tax reduction, along with the reduction in debt servicing, allowed us to reduce the huge budget deficit that we had been facing for years in the Mexican economy. We not only reduced the deficit, we eliminated it. And for 2 years, we ran a budget surplus. And the last year of the administration, a balanced budget with tax reduction as well. That's when a friend of mine coined the phrase, very appropriate one, that there is life after death. And he was very right, because with this debt reduction, with the elimination of the budget deficit, we were able at the same time to increase dramatically the resources for social programs, not by printing money at the central bank, but with real savings coming precisely from this debt reduction. And we were able to channel to education the largest amount in this century ever channeled to education in Mexico. We were able to build a new hospital every 2 weeks during the past 6 years of my administration, to have record numbers of housing starts, and certainly to introduce rural reform, where for the first time we were able to handle titles, legal titles to the peasants in their lands, more than 1 million in 10 months. The previous example was a nation country which in 10 years handled 500,000 of these titles. So property rights became a fundamental part of rural reform and the whole process of economic reform in Mexico. And we found that it was possible to have fiscal responsibility and social commitment. And this came precisely from this factor of having the opportunity to channel additional resources from the budget without running a deficit during the administration. Yes, economic reform had to go hand in hand with social reform. Economic and social reform that place great emphasis on taking care of the environment. We had to do that because in the past we had neglected the environment. And the world which we inherited from our parents was not a better one from the one that we expected to inherit to our children. So we prove also that you can have additional economic growth and at the same time taking care of the environment. And the reverse is also true. You can find environmental policies that are promoters of economic growth. So we declare protected areas that are equivalent in size to several European countries. We established the protection of endangered species. And also, we had to take care of the quality of the air, especially in Mexico City, where we had to invest more than $4 billion to upgrade the quality of the air. And that reminds me of the fact that when the Aztecs came to Mexico City, it was not called Mexico City then, but they never imagined that above 2,000 meters, there were going to be 15 million people living there. Had they thought about that, I think they would have settled in Acapulco and not in Mexico City. But finally, they did it there. And to have the largest city in the world, Mexico City, the commitment for a better environment, cleaner air, was a firm one, which we were able to finance with the resources that we had derived from the privatization process and from the channeling of more resources coming both domestic and foreign into this process of economic reform that we had begun. This allowed us fiscal responsibility to lower inflation from almost 200% when I took office to 7% this year when I left it, and to recover economic growth. Paul mentioned that when I left office, the economy was growing 4%. No, 4.5%, because half percentage point meant a lot when it's in terms of economic growth, but still growing faster. And that means that we've been able to achieve price stability with economic recovery. And at the same time, more than half the total budget is going to social programs, and therefore having the capacity to respond to expectations from the population. Yes, economic reform, social reform, but we also had to tackle political reform. Mexico is a country of 90 million people, and every presidential term we add 10 million more to the total population. So we have to continue changing like we did the past 6 years in economic, social, and also political terms. And we were convinced that democracy is not an event, it's a process which we were determined to strengthen, especially during the presidential election of this year of 1994. This was a very tragic year in Mexico, as Paul mentioned before, but it was also a very hopeful one. And hope came from the election. Civic Mexico made its debut during this election because Mexicans demanded not so much that the government be revised in its size, which it had been, but that its government worked. And that was its fundamental demand. And it showed with the political reform that we introduced. And it had to be proved during the election. And it had to be proved with a clean and transparent election. We invested more than $2 billion in providing citizens with a new ID with their picture on it, with the new organization of the election, which required almost 1 million organizers, and also more than 100,000 volunteers that were observers of the transparency of the election. And we even introduced new words that have become household words in Mexico, like exit polls, quick counts, and certainly electoral results the very same day of the election. Two friends of mine from Harvard, which are here tonight, Bill Schneider and Gary Oren, worked very hard in the 70s to allow the US to have exit polls like the one you had in 1976. Well, in Mexico, the first exit poll was produced this year. And it provided Mexicans with the confidence that their election had been a transparent one, because they knew the very same day of the election that it had been results responding to their own choice, to their own views. It was also, we not only had a great election, but we also derived great lessons from that election. The most important one is that Mexicans are very courageous and great people. Because a few days before the election, some people spread rumors that voters should stay home because it was dangerous to go and vote, and they should watch what happened and wait at their own places. Mexicans didn't listen to that. Registered voters, which are almost all citizens in Mexico, went by the millions to the electoral booth. 78% of registered voters went to vote on election day in Mexico, with their children in their hands, with their families along. And they proved with their presence that no rumor can stop the democratic process. And we are certainly encouraged by that fact, and President Zedillo has a clear mandate for his own process of reform. Yes, political reform, economic and social transformations, but we knew that these changes were introducing great expectations in the population. And for them to respond to these expectations, they had to deliver. Deliver in terms of well-being, deliver in terms of increasing standards of living. And that's precisely what we require. And increasing standards of living in the world of today only come from an open economy, from freer trade. That's why in the beginning of my administration, when all of us in Mexico rejected the possibility of a free trade agreement with the US and Canada, we had to face the new realities. And I have to tell you that it was the courage and the wisdom of two American administrations that allowed us to finally conclude this possibility of generating more employment opportunities in Mexico through freer trade, and more employment opportunities in the US and Canada as well. I have to say that the courage of President Clinton to push NAFTA in the US Congress, and the ability of Ambassador Cantor in the process of negotiation, and also the wisdom of former President Bush and the intensity of Ambassador Carla Hills that allowed this truly, as you call it, bipartisan decision that got NAFTA through in the US Congress and opened these opportunities for our two countries. Yes, for us Mexicans, in the past, when people wanted jobs, they went north to the border with the US, and many went even further to the US and even Canada. Today, Mexicans don't have to migrate looking for jobs. Jobs are moving to the places where they live, and this is precisely what NAFTA produced for us. The opportunity to generate new jobs precisely where people live, and therefore reduce drastically this massive process of migration within the country and certainly towards the US. We were convinced that NAFTA would allow us to export goods and not people. And this is something that those who have the number 187 in their minds should have present, that yes, it's not through one decree that you will stop migration. It's through generating these employment opportunities, through opening new jobs. And in the world of today, it is through freer trade, through generating these opportunities for investment and the movement of capital that will allow to solve the massive problems of migration that, by the way, are occurring in all parts of the world. And that's why the whole world needs freer trade in order to deliver to the expectations of the population. NAFTA has been good for Mexico, no doubt. We've been able to generate tens of thousands of new jobs just this year at the beginning of NAFTA. The same has happened to the US and also for Canada. And we have proven in reality that NAFTA was not a zero-sum negotiation, but a win-win-win situation which delivered for the three countries. Exports from Mexico to the US have been growing this year at the rate of 25% in dollar terms, same rate that exports from the US have been growing to the Mexican market. And that's precisely what we wanted with NAFTA. And for us Mexicans meant also the opportunity to diversify our economic structure. 6 years ago, oil represented 90% of all Mexican exports. Today, oil represents only 6% of all Mexican exports, precisely because of this diversification. But NAFTA was not only a trade negotiation, which was a very important one, very complicated one, very intense and very tense as well. It also meant a different type of relations between Mexico and the United States. We had a very difficult relation over the decades, over the 2 centuries in which we've been independent nations. There was a Mexican president who used to say, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the US." And this reflected a reality. By the way, a friend of mine, and I have told this to some friends here, a friend of mine from Israel told me, "It's very peculiar what you say, because in Israel we say the reverse. Poor Israel, so close to God, so far from the US." But that's another story that I will tell you afterwards. The fact is that for good historical reasons, Mexicans have tried to live as far as they could from the US. But geography put us together, and history as well. And while the San Andreas Fault runs from north to south, we will stay together until it runs from west to east. So it won't happen in the next 400 million years. So it was important to get together on a different type of relationship in the next few years. A relationship based on respect, and also on emphasizing things that were common to both countries. And that's precisely what we work for. emphasizing what we call the coincidences and respecting the differences. And we were able to do so. We were able to establish this new type of relationship, which had much to do with the possibility of getting together in the new world that is being shaped today. And yes, NAFTA also opened the way for Mexico for a new and more prosperous relationship with the rest of Latin America. We established the first ever free trade agreement in the history of the region, the one with Chile, and then the one with Bolivia, and then with Colombia, and Venezuela, and Central America as well. And free trade is now the trend of the future today for Latin America. And it's showing that it is precisely the tool to deliver in the process of democratic transformation that is happening in Latin America today, deliver in terms of satisfying the expectation of the population within the democratic process. Let me tell you something that happened to us in Mexico when we proposed a free trade agreement with the US. Free trade? Many people asked. That could hurt our sovereignty. And sovereignty for Mexicans is a crucial question, especially with the historical relationship with our neighbor to the north. That's why it was so important for us to prove to the Mexican people that a free trade agreement would actually strengthen our sovereignty. And we learned that with free trade, we were able to gain higher rates of growth and therefore deliver to satisfy the expectations in the democratic transformation of the country. Therefore, with democracy and economic growth, our country is stronger to maintain our sovereignty. Therefore, what we learn is that the freer the trade, the stronger the sovereignty of our country. That was important for us in Mexico. It may be important for other countries where the debate about sovereignty is increasing in the globalization of the economy in the world in which we live. It all shows to you that change was important in Mexico, economic, social, and political, but the most important change in Mexico took place in the minds of my countrymen, in their mentalities, because Mexicans changed the way how they look at themselves and their relationship with the rest of the world. That is the most profound change in Mexico taking place is cultural, because it's culture that defines your nation. It's culture that gives you the real strength. It's culture that allows you to remain as a people in a global world like the one we are living in today. That's why we emphasize so much this cultural transformation, this change in mentalities, this new attitude of Mexicans. Not that problems have disappeared. They never disappear. They merely change. But today, and during the past 6 years, Mexicans learn that they have the strength to face these problems, to face the new hurdles, to overcome them, and to achieve the higher goals that we establish for ourselves. This is the lesson that we learn in Mexico. This is the lessons that we derive from globalization, from free trade, from a different type of relationship with the US and with the rest of the world. We believe that if there is anything certain, that is that globalization means that we can no longer think of a world divided where zero-sum negotiations block the way to freedom, development, or peace. In the dynamics of this contemporary world, one region's weakness is a global disadvantage. That's why we have all to prosper together. And the only way to do so is precisely by getting the perspective of freer trade, more opportunities, less doors and walls trying to block reality and stop the dynamics of this economy in the world in which we live. We must work very hard to add an effective world order which is based on laws and institutions. They are the only ones capable of casting away any threat or confrontation. We will be able to speak of a real community of nations only if we are capable of higher stages of collective strength. And that will happen among sovereign nations precisely with the capacity to build common agreements based on opportunities through our common efforts. Such strength will be able to deal effectively with the pressing global issues. Among them, certainly free trade, but also sustained and fair growth, productive international associations, technological cooperation, international migration, the effective defense of the environment, and the collective action against drug traffickers. Those are the great tasks of our time. The Cold War is over, but the war on poverty is not. The war on drug traffickers is not. The war in favor of the environment is not. That's what we must continue fighting together. This is a fight not for us. I brought my daughter tonight to this dinner because in her eyes, I tried to look to the future and try to find if the answers that we provided are the right ones. That is, our battle is a moral one because it's for the next generation and the generation after that one. I believe that we will be up to this task because if we succeed, the rewards will be very great, not for us, but for them, for our children and the children of our children. I treasure very much this award because of what it means. I believe it means a recognition for my country, Mexico. Mexico, which is a community of people which firmly believe that it is certainly worth trying. We tried, and many Mexicans believe that we succeeded. Thank you very much.
President Salinas, thank you. Congratulations. May the next stage in your distinguished career be just as successful and accomplished as the last. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to serve dinner, and it is time to ask Stan Rubin and his orchestra to strike up the band. Thank you very much.
President Salinas headed up the Mexican government from 1988 until last week. Mexican law limits a president to one 6-year term. His successor,